I'm going to read the first opening pages of a book called, in English, Flight Was the Most Precious Thing We Had, by Marta Marín-Dòmine, and it goes like this. It's a book that came out in early 2019. It's won, I'm counting, 4 major awards, and I remember it sold like hotcakes, and I was one of the buyers. The first chapter is called To Err. To err, to stray from a given path, to go from one place to another, haphazardly. Erring, erratic, erroneous, from the Latin errare, applied to people who take unpredictable paths, who roam, to everything which proceeds unthinkingly, an erratic rock, an erratic pain. Whoever roams alone unsettles other people to a certain extent, that great sedentary majority which claims to have found a home and to have followed its destiny. And so that person will be regarded as someone who is inclined to make mistakes, which is why being errant is associated with error. Contrary to those to think they have put down roots, whoever wanders aimlessly, the error, has no fear of mistakes or errors. Open to change, having chosen to be on the move, when he reaches a given place, he doesn't take it over, but simply lives there. And when that person has stayed there long enough, having tired of the place, or to avoid the occasionally irrepressible wish to take possession of it, he is allergic to the expression, our home, then he abandons the place with a lightness of spirit only possessed by those who have no sense of nostalgia. He is faithless to his birthplace, the wanderer, the vagabond, the quicksilver-like, the restless, the dissatisfied by landscapes, going through borders and airports, stations, beds and homes, lovers. The idle, the lazy, and the mundane too, the pariahs, the pursued, the dreamers, the scatterbrained, almost all the crazies, depend more on compasses than they do on calendars, because space is in opposition to delimited, counted, distributed time. Whoever roams remembers the passing landscapes. Whoever takes roots remembers the passing years. It can happen, and does happen, that in the landscape of the errant one, a violent cannibalistic moment of time can flare up. When time flays the landscape, and we are not referring to wounds such as ploughed furrows, nor morphological changes in the roots, nor traces of animals or ancient minerals, nor geological accidents such as caves or cliffs, nor the successive stages in which cities see their past demolished to make way for an ephemeral infinity, the landscape becomes a sketched surface, meaning that as soon as the violence done to beings both human and animal leaves a mark on the landscape, that is when a moment of time flares up that will first of all be a mere recollection and then will form part of memory. Time then is a letter which following generations will have to learn to interpret before it is swallowed up by oblivion. That is how time dissolves itself into space. The recollections of the errant one are at one with the senses. Here he saw such and such a thing. There he smelt some other thing. Over there he tasted that other thing. Wanderers give shape to their recollections, depending on the accidents of space. They know nothing of monuments or plaques. The recollections of a wanderer emerge through tectonic plates, each impregnated with all the others, fused and devoured by them, overlapped. For a wanderer, recollections are not written out on flat surfaces where one can find lists of inscriptions, dates, deeds. Lacking possessions as he does, recollections for him are screened on thin air. All he has to do is look up, or if his recollections are painful, look at them out of the corner of his eye. And the wanderer knows that he who roams, either because he has to or because he wishes to leave his country and loves behind, will be plunged into an uninscribed life, as if his body were weightless and occasionally invisible. Like everyone else, the wanderer will sometimes forget, but the wanderer himself is always forgotten. Being forgotten is the price he pays for his freedom. Only those wanderers who are forced to err as a punishment, wearing a mark like that of Cain, will be remembered. Those are the opening chapters of the book. We've got Marta here in front of me, in fact. Hello there, hi.
Hello, Matthew.
In fact, the thing it's a book I remember very well, but I've been able to refresh my memory. And one of the things that surprised me about it is in these opening pages that most people, when they talk about moving, they talk about exile. People who move to live in another country. But in your book, you make a very clear distinction between people who are exiles and people who are real wanderers. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little what the difference is, sort of major theme here?
Yeah, well, in a very time capsule, I would say, the book departs from the need to reflect on what is memory and how we represent the past events that we have not lived. So there are many branches and many ways to look for answers. And one of them is to look inside the memory of my family that was struck by exile. But it is a family that is not peculiar, but has a peculiar trait because this family was formed by anarchist people. Mm-hmm. And these anarchist people were forced to exile after the end of the war here in Barcelona, where we are, in Spain in general. But also anarchism, in a certain way, has ingrained in the ideology this wish to wander around the planet, because as we know, they don't have this strong belief in nationhood. The planet is the nation, the country is the planet. So the book is an homage to those that were forced to exile, but also to this utopia of trying to build a world without borders, which is impossible, and we all have our identity and so on and so forth. But it's a combination of that.
Okay. I found the anarchism interesting because I was an active anarchist for several years in London. I know the books. I've done some of the stuff. I've talked to people, especially communists.
Yes, exactly.
But precisely that, because in the book you're writing partly about yourself and your own experiences, so there's an element of autobiography. But as you say, you're also writing the biographies in many ways of people who are very close to you or were very close to you, your parents. You'd also mention your grandfather and so forth. And I would say when you write either biography or autobiography, it's very easy to fall into various traps. Like autobiography, it's very difficult. It's very easy to give too much information, more than the reader really wants. Or it's possible to get a little bit of dramatization, or self-pity. When you're writing about other people who are very close to you, it's very easy to get sentimental. None of this happens in the book. So can I ask you how you approach that, if you were conscious of those problems or they just weren't problems for you?
This is difficult to answer because you never know exactly what are the techniques that you are applying when you write. Otherwise, maybe you wouldn't write. But I have to say that I have two hats. I also teach literature, so I'm a little bit self-aware when I write of the tricks and the wrongs that we might make. And one of them is sentimentalism, which is something that I hate. And usually you are absolutely right. When we approach past events, we tend to put sugar in them, and which is something that I don't like. In a way, it's trying to be poetically crude about yourself, if this is possible. You know,
okay.
I'm following in a way the French writers that are self-devoted into what is called self-fiction or autofiction, and which are people that are capable of saying the truth without being brutal.
Okay, yeah.
Working literally around the truth, and without trying to trick the reader into too much sentimentalism, because this is a little bit of a trick, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, and trying to be also fair with myself and with my own contradictions, right? Sometimes we like something, we don't like something that we say, you're right. I've been trying to be honest, but many people say that. But for me, in any case, for me, writing in an honest way is to portray my own contradictions, my fears also.
There's also another element in the book which you go back to again and again and again, precisely because your father was an anarchist. You yourself moved around a lot. You talk about the bombings of Barcelona. You talk about Barcelona under Franco. You talk about the Spanish anarchists who died in Mauthausen. You talk about the deaths in Auschwitz of family members of your friend Rochelle Rubinstein in Canada. You talk about the gunmen even hired by the bosses in Barcelona in the 1920s to shoot anarchist leaders and labor lawyers. So that was part of the idea of the book, to write about the dark side of what is effectively a very dark century, the 20th century. That was intentional to get some of that horror over.
For sure. Well, the book departs, has many departures, point of departures, but one of them for certain is the fact that my father had written a book of memoirs about his own experience as a very young boy, 14, during the Spanish Civil War. The family went to exile twice after the Civil War and before, during the 20s, because my grandfather was involved in the anarchist revolution, we could say, during another dictatorship, right? The fact that I didn't know what to do with these memoirs, and it's quite funny because I teach testimonial literature in Canada, right? But I couldn't read these memoirs, were too sad for me. It was something that I felt too much identified with, but also the fact that I couldn't read these memoirs sparked the big question why I cannot read them if I'm capable of reading something that even is more atrocious, like memories of Auschwitz survivors. And so I thought that people who have not lived through experiences but heard these experiences coming from, for instance, their parents, are very much affected. And I'm not talking precisely about trauma. I'm talking about something that even might be unperceived. And this is what I keep asking in this book, how we do remember, what are the transformations of these memories that have been passed into us, what is the transformation, the distillations that we make, and how is represented after all. You see, there is always the wish to recover some memories of some people that are unknown, and also the need to reflect on how we represent these memories. Because after all, I think the 21st century is the century of memory representation. And watch out now after this confinement, global confinement, what is going to happen with memories that we all are going to share, right? So, yes, now I've lost a little bit the thread of your question, but the fact is that I was very conscious of doing that. So, recollecting memories from other people and reflecting the way we do it.
One last, we've only got about half a minute left, I'm afraid, but this is just pure curiosity. You talk in the book about all these people. What would the subject of the book be in one word? Maybe rootlessness. Rootlessness would be a possible way of summing it all up. Out of curiosity, after writing the book, did it lead you to a place that you could, even a mental place that you could call home?
This is very interesting, Matthew, because I'm thinking about coming back to Barcelona.
Ah.
Well, I am now in Barcelona, but I had to be now in Toronto, so I'm teaching online. But actually, I think next year I'll be moving for good. So this is a big result.
Okay, all right. I tell you, Marta, thank you very much. We have to stop there. Time's up. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.